Hello, you can all hear me, right? Okay, I hope you're having fun so far. I am Zhao. My co-first author, Yujie, is sitting there on the third row. And I'm here to present our work on affective touch as immediate and passive wearable intervention. This work is a work between us at Cornell Tech and University of Chicago. I wish I have a clicker because I like to move around, but I don't. So, in our field of mobile and wearable, thank you. In our field of mobile and wearable mental health intervention, we have this grand vision of a closed loop system in which we want to be able to censor and intervene. We sense information from the user and we intervene accordingly. Now, if we zoom into the intervention side, the interventions we have been working on for our field, the majority of them is something we characterize as an active intervention, meaning that they require attentions to be effective. You have to actually do them. The examples of active interventions are things we are familiar, such as just-in-time messages or doing mindfulness exercises in your phone. And they work great. We all know work that shows that their effectiveness. However, the user attention is a luxury, and the user do not always have the attention to turn into the intervention. For example, think when someone's having elevated anxiety, or when the users are in the middle of something and cannot shift away. And this motivates us to study something called passive intervention, in which passive interventions can be effective with minimal attention. Now, this word passive intervention is not used a lot yet, but our field in UbiComp has been studying passive intervention for quite some time. And in the field of stress and anxiety, which is the theme of today's session, there are 3 large groups of passive interventions. The first one is guided breathing. And the second one is introspective awareness. The third one is voice self-perception. If you take a moment, like these are different devices, they have different form factors, they use different sensory modalities. But fundamentally, there's one mechanism that powers all of them, and that is entrainment. And entrainment works as if we engineer an external signal, we put that external signal to the human using one of the sensory modality. And that signal will have an impact to the physiological response of the human, which in turn will change the psychological state. In this pipeline, the physiological response is the leverage point. If we cannot change the physiological response, the intervention wouldn't work. So entrainment is really targeting at the physiological response. So here, this is the field that I have learned for you. Here's the closed-loop intervention system. There are the 2 types of interventions. Entrainment powers passive intervention. Our work asks the question here. Is there another mechanism that we can use to build passive intervention? Well, there are promising candidates in our body. Affective touch is one of them. And this is affective touch. Great. Now if you would take your arm with me and take your hand, start to stroke your forearm. Amazing. Many of you, it's going to make you feel good. Okay. What you are doing now by stroking your arm is you are inducing the activation of a nerve fiber called C-tactile. And what C-tactile do is that C-tactile creates innate pleasantness. This is a level of pleasantness that's a reaction in your brain that without any interpretation, this just works. It's pleasant. By the way, this is true across the species. So the next time when you pet your cat or a dog and they seem to like it, this is what's going on. Great. Now, what was exciting for us is that C-tactile can induce a physiological relaxation response in the resting state, which start to sound very much like an anxiety intervention, with one layer of translation, and that is, we don't really care about what happens in the resting state. We want our interventions to work for people when they are already stressed, meaning that we want to test effective touch when in the stressful state. First, require us to deliver effective touch by a device. So we took the state-of-art device that is a robotic arm, and we translate the mechanism to something that's more compact and wearable, stroking. And in the end, the device looks like this. We put it on the back of the user's forearm, the hairy part of their skin. And as for our hypothesis, you could probably guess, but we hypothesized that in a stressful scenario, the user will feel less physiological stress and less psychological stress if they receive affective touch. We measure physiological stress through heart rate variability and psychological stress through state and trait anxiety inventory. And you might ask, why separate those two deliberately? And the reason is the stress manipulation we did in lab, which is the Trier social stress test. For this kind of stress test, we do not always see the correlation between physiological response and psychological response. Therefore, we need both the self-report and the biological measurement to have a comprehensive picture of the stress. Okay, I'm setting this up until here. What did we find? Can affective touch mitigate stress as a passive intervention? Well, for psychological stress, yes. We gladly found that the people who receive affective touch self-reported about 50% lower level of anxiety compared to those who didn't receive affective touch. Now, you would expect that we see something similar for the physiological stress. However, we did not. We see that whether or not people receive affective touch, it did not change their physiological stress response. Their heart rate variability was comparable between groups. We need to do some deliberations given this result. First, by asking, does it confront with prior results? Because remember that I told you, we were excited about it can reduce the physiological relaxation response in the resting state. But for our observation, we didn't see such relaxation response in the stressful state. I want to point out that stressful state is very different from resting state, in which there's one stimuli in the resting state, and that is affective touch. For the stressful state, there are two stimuli. There's affective touch, and then there's the stressor we manipulated. And in the view of physiological response, either of these stimuli could take dominance, and it's possible that in our experiment, the stressor took dominance and induced the physiological stress response. So we think, although this is unexpected, it's sensible, which lead to a more important question, and that is, how in the world did this work if it's not through changing the physiology? And this, gladly, we took qualitative data. We asked the people how they felt about affective touch while they were in the stressful scenario. And there are two themes, as I see I'm running out of time. The first theme looked like this. So participants says that affective touch make them feel that there's someone to provide moral support. It feels like friends come up to you, and then someone saying that it's fine, it's okay. We summarize this theme as emotional support as a label. The second theme is more interesting, which people says that affective touch took some of their brain energy to focus on the bad things, such as I'm not prepared for this, I'm not good at this, and put it somewhere else to soothe you. And this we labeled as attention redirection, which that in a negative affect present scenario, you change your attention from the things that's causing the negative affect to something that's more pleasant, more positive. And if you're familiar with emotion regulation literature or like anxiety, this should start to ring some bells as the process model of emotion regulation, which for short, this is a psychological way that all of you do innately to regulate your own emotion when negative affect present. So in summary, this is the field before we do this paper. This is the field after we do this paper. We found that affective touch has the potential to power passive intervention through a psychological way of regulating emotion as a way to intervene with anxiety. Thank you. By the way, these are the people's faces that are on this paper.
Any question? You can start setting.